Welcome. Ryan Castle here, the CEO of the Cape Cod and Island Association of Realtors, and I'm here with our Government Affairs Director, Leslie Sandberg. Thanks, Leslie, for joining us today.
Thanks, Ryan.
We want to talk today about what's happening at Fall Town Meeting and kind of walk you through some of the issues we're tracking in your town and what we're working on holistically around the Cape. And so we'll start with a little bit, Leslie, about kind of what we look at. So at the government affairs side of the advocacy side of the association, we have really a public policy guide that kind of sets the framework for the issues we look at.
Absolutely.
And where the Cape Cod and Island Association of Realtors stands on those issues, because there's the same issues that happen time and time again. And rather than continue to look at, have to decide where we stand each time it comes up, we kind of have standing policies. And so that all falls in our public policy guide. And we've made some recent additions to that public policy guide by adding a session on building codes, for instance, like the specialized in energy building codes. But how does that process work? How does the Public Policy Committee and the whole thing work? It's about putting together a policy plan.
Thanks for asking. I mean, Ryan, what we find is that it usually something bubbles up from our membership, whether it's, for instance, I'll take the example, the stretch code. The stretch code was changing and becoming more stringent, if you will, and people wanted to know what was it all about. They didn't know. So they said, hey, you know what? Enough people don't know. We really need to look at it, research it, and then build a policy around it. So what we did at the Public Policy Committee is that we actually had speakers come, and they were from both sides of the issue. Those who were pro-stretch code and talk about the benefits, those that are worried about the stretch code getting more restrictive and saying how, the cost problems and the grid problems with that. We went through that. We talked amongst ourselves, and then we also talked with other people. We spoke with you. And from that, we were able to come down with a policy that actually everybody was comfortable with and could represent the policy that we want appropriately, and then we asked the board of directors to take a look at it, and you can take it from there,
it, right? And that's the whole thing. It ultimately comes down to the board, but it starts at that committee level, and it starts with you guys getting research and hearing opinions from a lot of different people, and kind of saying, where do realtors stand on this based on our guiding principles of what we stand for, which is really the preamble to the code of ethics of being a realtor. So with that, you kind of see that whole guides of the Public Policy Committee role, the board director's role, and our policy guide that really then, once we have a policy guide, allows you and I to actually get to work. It actually allows us to contact and talk to, members of the select boards or planning boards or whatever, or staff, and say, hey guys, have y'all considered this? And it really helps inform us about the realtor's take on the issue by that kind of process through the Public Policy Committee. So I think that's a really important segment there. And so also on the main issues we look at, right? The last couple of years, they've been the same kind of issues.
Yes.
And really, we have really focused our policy efforts around 4 big issues, which is number 1 is bridge replacement. It's not necessarily a local issue, but our members have said this over and over. Our leadership has said this over and over. Bridge replacement and better access to Cape Cod is probably our biggest number 1 realtor issue right now, from the standpoint of how making sure we can do everything we can to move that forward. Another big issue that we are tackling on a daily basis is zoning reform and housing affordability issues, right? I think we all know the Cape has gotten more expensive. So how do we move forward on pushing zoning reform, pushing housing affordability, housing production issues, and moving forward that way? A big one component, because of once again, the preamble to the Code of Ethics talks about this, protection of private property rights.
Yes.
And how does that stuff that comes up, whether it's rental restrictions or whether it's building issues or building code issues, everything, how does it impact the private property rights of property owners.
Correct.
And then the last is a really Cape Cod specific thing, which is clean water infrastructure. This goes so much hand in hand with our housing affordability issue, but it's also our long-standing last several years campaign we've had about Realtors for Clean Water, about not only advocating for mechanisms like watershed permits and sewer infrastructure to move clean water forward, but also educating our members about the clean water infrastructure and some of the nuances that are coming out of there. So that's kind of some of our, I think, our long-standing policy issues.
Absolutely. And again, I think what people need to know with a public policy guide, it's a living, breathing guide, and it changes as issues come up. But also it helps us use that lens of, when we're looking at a public policy issue, is how would our members look at it? What do we need to do to be helpful for our members in advocating for this?
And that's why the public policy committee is so important, right? Yeah. And that's where they're looking at this stuff on a monthly basis, formulating it, giving us insight, opinions, that sort of thing.
And we've got a really good committee. And if anybody ever wants to join it, you'll always be welcome.
Absolutely. Falmouth town meeting. One to note about Falmouth town meeting, it's a representative town meeting.
Right.
So not all citizens can vote. I think everyone's can go, but it's a representative so that your precinct representative is the one voting for you and that kind of thing. So if you have a passion for yes or no, and we'll talk about something we'd like you to reach out to your precinct representative on later in this, you need to do that. And we'll provide a link to the precinct representatives as well, so you can reach out to them, talk about the one issue we want to talk about at the end.
Exactly. And those representatives are actually voted on by people. So it's the only form of government that's representative in that way. All the other ones are considered open town meetings.
Or Barnstable, which is not a town meeting, it's a town council form of government, which is representative as well.
Good point.
So you've got Article 15 in Falmouth.
Yep.
What does that do, and what is that?
There's a lot to this article, but I'm going to just hit some of the top points. They want to create a mixed-use overlay district. So they're going to ask town voters to establish a mixed residential and commercial overlay district. That'll be superimposed at certain eligible locations in their two business districts and their business redevelopment zoning districts. So basically, when you do an overlay, the underlying zoning remains in effect for the dimension and all other provisions of the zoning bylaw. But then now you have the ability to have mixed-use development and multifamily developments that comply with the provision of this section to be allowed as right. So bottom line is, think of it as it's commercial.
Above the shop type thing, right?
Exactly.
You can continue to do commercial on the ground floor as you've been doing, and you're just going to be able to do housing above it.
Yeah, and the only thing in the ground floor that you can't do is actually have parking. So the bottom line is it has to be a legit business, and it can be government, retail, whatever, but that's what they're looking for. And it's kind of going back to that smart growth principle of having the commercial.
Yeah, you're putting it in the activity centers, you're doing that, but you're providing more ability to create the housing production we need on Cape Cod to be able to make sure we sustain ourselves as a year-round viable community.
Exactly, and it's considering making them livable, walkable communities, which is great.
So, and, this next one is Article 16.
Right.
They're the first town to do this, to step up and go ahead and say, we're going to go ahead and align it with the new state law for the most part.
Exactly.
And so under the Affordable Homes Act that was passed and signed into law in Massachusetts, there's what's called by right ADU provision. And I wanted to clear what by right is. By right means by buying the property, by owning the property, you have the right to do this as long as you meet the requirements of the zoning that's in place and the requirements on everything else in place, wastewater, everything else. But you have the right to do it without having to get a special permit.
Correct.
Or permits via planning board or anything like that. You're going to work with the staff to meet the criteria laid out in the zoning in your allowed use, right? It's basically becomes an allowed use under by right.
And some of the things that are in the Affordable Homes Act that they've included here, they're like principles.
So they're basically taking their ADU bylaw, their accessory dwelling unit bylaw in Article 16 and updating it to meet the criteria of the Affordable Homes Act.
Which means that you can have 900, your ADU can be 900 square feet or 50% of the gross area of the principal the principal housing unit on the property,
whichever is less. Yeah.
And you
so
can only
if you have a 2,000 square foot house, you can only do a 900 square foot ADU.
Right.
If you have a 1,500 square foot house, you can only do a 750 square foot accessory dwelling unit.
Right. And that, I mean, I think they just want to keep it, they're looking at
and that is a standard. That 50% 900 square foot threshold is a standard people use around the country.
Yeah. And getting back to what you said, no special permit is needed, which is great. And then also, you just have to have one parking spot, which is also something that's interesting. But they do allow, and Falmouth has done it. And if you are from Falmouth, just go look at Article 16. There are some things you can be more restricted of, but by and by, they truly are, as you said, aligning it with what's in the Affordable Homes Act.
Absolutely. I mean, site plan review still required, but that's a staff function, you know, and all that stuff. So all the zoning provisions still are there. And you can have 2 bedrooms as well. So.
Yes, you can. Yeah, which is great. The next one is Articles 20 through 23, and these are 3 citizens' petitions by the same person, and it's for affordable housing. And it's interesting. They just want to see if town voters will authorize the select board to issue a request for proposal or otherwise convey 3 parcels of land. And this will be for affordable housing. It's 0 West Falmouth Highway in West Falmouth, 21 Pheasant Lane in East Falmouth, and 20 Brigadine Drive in East Falmouth. So basically, it's, somebody who cares about affordable housing has put together a citizen's petition, and we'll just see what the debate brings.
Yeah. Article 23 is a urine diversion program, which has been talked a lot about in Falmouth. So what are they doing here?
Well, they're doing this. This is, again, a citizen's petition. It's the same group that they're going to ask town voters to appropriate $1.9 million of free cash to finance a pilot project to evaluate the urine diversion program as a method for effectively reducing the amount of nitrogen and phosphorus entering town waters. The thing about this, it's been around for a while. And this is I think the 2nd or 3rd iteration of a citizen's petition. And the one thing about urine diversion, some people think it's great. The one problem they had when they were debating this is that once you collected the urine, where does it go? And that's something that actually has stalled this. So that'll be a question that I don't know has yet been answered, but hopefully town representatives in Falmouth at the town meeting will ask that question. Once you collect it, where does it go? Because that's a big part of it.
All right. And then Article 32 is something that we have been working on.
Absolutely.
There was a short-term rental task force in town of Falmouth. We had there was a realtor on the task force, but the proposal went forward from the task force, despite objections there. And went to town meeting warrant. And in our review, there was a couple things in talking to our members in the vacation rental market in Falmouth that was probably short-sighted in the view of the task force, maybe to not look at. And so it seemed a little rushed. So we asked the select board to, this might not be ready for town meeting, but it's already on the warrant. When they came up with their recommendation, to not say we recommend it. And so the select board listened to us. And what is the select board's recommendation on this?
Well, this is interesting. After you had sent a letter, and we had some wonderful members who actually reached out also to select board members, they decided to not recommend it, but not even not recommend it. They recommended to indefinitely postpone it, because they realize that there's things they need to work on.
Yeah, to us, there's a couple provisions in there that would be harmful to the vacation rental industry. And we as an association say, hey, let's figure out how to regulate the industry that works.
Right.
And perhaps, maybe produce more value to our members for people to want to work with and use our members to help navigate some of that, to make sure that everyone's being a good neighbor.
Right.
But the problem is some of these provisions, one is the limits it to 1 per owner.
Yeah. And they're not protecting the existing short-term rentals.
So there's no grandfathering in of existing people with multiple permits. And one of our concerns is they can't even tell you how many have multiple permits.
Correct.
So there's no research to back up to say, here's how many people we're stripping the property rights away from. because they didn't do that research.
Well, exactly. And in other towns that have passed short-term rental bylaws, they have done the research. And from their research, they found that they want to grandfather in or protect the existing short-term rentals. And then that only goes away when there's a transfer or conveyance.
Yeah, so, absolutely. And also no town on the Cape and the Islands has restricted it only one per person.
Right.
Because it's not just one per entity. So it's not like you can just go set up another LLC and do another property. They're asking you to name all the members of the LLC or the trust as well. And then if you're a member of that LLC or you're a beneficiary of that trust, you wouldn't be able to have, and you were of another LLC or trust, you wouldn't be able to also get a permit.
Yeah.
So, couples that own two properties together in an LLC, yep, or maybe brothers and sisters who are both beneficiaries of two different trusts would not be able to short-term rent both those properties.
Well, exactly. And there was actually examples from a couple of our members who actually have done short-term rental, I should say vacation rentals.
Yeah, vacation rentals.
On and on for decades, is that sometimes there's properties with a primary home and a carriage house or a secondary home, and they've been doing it for years and there's been no problem. And suddenly, if they only had one certificate or one license, as they're calling it, that goes away.
Yeah.
And so they're trying to give a solution to a problem that does not yet appear to exist.
Yeah, the other, I think there's a couple other provisions in there that we felt they may have rushed in the language.
Yes.
Because it didn't quite make sense the way they want to do it, especially regarding parking.
Yeah, exactly. The big thing with short-term rentals when it comes to parking is they don't want parking on the streets. They want parking that's located on the property. And the way they wrote it, and as you pointed, you're the one that found it, which was great, that they said not more than one per bedroom, which means they didn't have to put any.
Yes. Usually, most short-term rental bylaws we see say one parking spot per bedroom or something like that, which I still have a real problem with from the standpoint of if you're not putting that same restriction on an owner-occupied home, then you run into the same parking on the street problem. However, in this situation, they could actually have done no parking.
Right. And also, just, too, is there's a gentleman who I know who's a member of ours who's on the planning board. And he also said the planning board did not recommend this, but please still reach out to your representative because it's not done until town meeting indefinitely postpones it.
Yeah. So please ask your town meeting representative to agree with the select board and indefinitely postpone based on the select board's recommendation.
Yeah. And that gives us an opportunity then to come back, have more conversations, and have a better short-term rental bylaw
in the future. That's workable.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for your work on this, and thanks for our members' work. This is where advocacy really meets the road for our members here.
Yeah, and I really got to say the members were great. They reached out to us, and it's like we had a good team, and you were a big part of it too, Ryan. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.